Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another month of Dig Your Dinner. This session is being recorded, just so you all are aware. My name is Anthony Reardon. I am the Horticulture Small Farms Extension Agent for Johnson County. And today our topic is plums and peaches. Plums, right? I think it's plums. Yes. I always get it confused with prunes, and then, we're just going up a hill. But yes, thank you for joining us today. If you're not familiar with the Dig Your Dinner uh, layout, I am going to be talking about the way that we grow the fruits, and then Chelsea will be talking about the way it's preserved and the nutrition of it, and the ways that it can be served. So let me get my presentation going, and we'll get started. Okay, so welcome to Peaches and Plums. So, the thing that you need to know about these is that they are very, very closely related. They are both stone fruits. So, especially if you're trying to grow these or even cherries or apples, your pears and as well as nectarines sometimes, they all kind of fall into the same category. So, you should be able to glean a lot of similar facts from this, and really just have a consistent, measurable way of of maintaining these across the board. I always try to throw a few publications in here for you guys to look at. The one that I would really pay attention to with this would be the Midwest Home Fruit Publication Guide. This has really all of the great information in there when it comes to maintaining fruits in the Midwest in general. There's a free version online, and then you can buy a version of this in our office as well for $40. Then also there's a lot of great extension publications out there. I'll actually be showing you quite a few publications with this throughout my portion of the presentation because there's a lot of stuff on stone fruits and the way you have to go about maintaining it. But this is a good guide that I was able to find from Minnesota Extension, which is growing stone fruits in home gardens. And of course, they go over your peaches and plums in this. So, a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. Peaches and plums are very cold hardiness dependent, meaning that they really are affected by how cold it gets outside. And if you ha have a particularly cold year or a year that is freezing, we may not get much production from them whatsoever. So we'll talk about that. Pruning practices are also very important for their longevity. They do have to be pruned in a specific way so that you can get these vegetables or these fruits. And then a pest control schedule along with this is very necessary. And then also there's a very fixed maintenance schedule. So peaches and plums in Kansas. Kansas climate offers deep cold plunges and temperature whiplash to plants. So that's something you need to keep in mind, specifically with these fruits that have such dependent buds on temperatures, right? So your peach flower buds are actually going to be the most sensitive. You may have noticed in recent years that we didn't have very much peach production at all. Last year was actually a very good year for peaches, but the 4 or 5 years before that, there was almost no peaches. And that is because we had late spring freezes. That has been sort of the nail in the coffin when it comes to your peach production, because you get those late spring freezes, they kill off the buds. The buds are what turn into the flowers that then turn into the fruits. So really, it all depends on cold hardiness and how well they can survive cold weather. That said, there is several varieties out there that do hold a bit of cold hardiness to them, and they can handle those conditions a little bit better. When it comes to your plums specifically, it's going to depend on the type of plum you're growing. So there are European and Japanese plums. The Japanese ones specifically are very sensitive to cold weather, whereas your European varieties do have a bit of moderate hardiness. So when it comes to choosing varieties, I was going to talk about peaches first here, and I actually am going with the recommendations that Giving Grove uses here in the Kansas City area. Giving Grove is an organization that helps people have charity or develop charity vet or fruit orchards essentially for donation. So the ones they generally recommend to people are the Harrow Diamond, Contender, and Red Haven varieties. Harrow Diamond is the one that will produce very early for you. So instead of harvesting in the June, July in the July-August window, you're actually going to be harvesting in June. I believe the earliest they've ever found with that variety is late May, actually. So it's a very early peach. The contender variety is hardy and late blooming, so this is one that is very good at avoiding frosts specifically. And then the Red Haven variety is kind of the standard for peaches. This is the one that all other peach varieties are compared to because it does perform so well for you. So if you're looking for other varieties that are specifically recommended by K-State, there's also publication, the Small and Tree Fruit Cultivars guide, which is you can find in the KSRE bookstore, and all you would have to do is type in the MF 1028 publication, and then it would list off all of those varieties for you to look through. When it comes to plums, as I mentioned, you have your European and Japanese varieties. In addition to their cold hardiness, there's also their need for fertilization that you have to keep in mind here. So your Japanese are self-sterile, meaning that they have to have two varieties there in order to be pollinated, and they have to be within 100 yards of each other for that to happen. Your European varieties, however, there are some that are partially self-fruitful. So those ones are a little bit less tedious when it comes to the care they need. We also have recommendations for these in the small and tree fruit cultivar guide. But the ones that Giving Grove, again, here in the Kansas City area, recommend and that have been proven in the area to perform well are the Methley and American Plum varieties. So Methley is self-fertile. It's a smaller tree, so you don't have to necessarily account for a lot of size for it. And then it's also black knot resistant, which is a disease that plums typically get, or they can get quite often. The American plum, also known as Prunus americana, is self-fertile again, so it's going to produce on its own without two varieties there. This one's more of a medium-sized tree, so think along the size of a typical crabapple. And it can also form thickets, so you might want some space for it because it does tend to expand. So I am going to get into the planting of these shortly, but before that, I just wanted to throw in a big or a quick recommendation here for always calling dig safe if you're going to be digging large holes in your yard. It's a free service. You just dial 811 and they come out and they mark any utility lines that may be on your property. And this can spare you from big issues, including, not having a gas leak, but also just not causing damage that could cost you a lot of money. So this is, funded by all of the utility companies that they partner with. It's not any cost to you. You just want to call ahead of time to make sure that they have enough time to get out there and mark those lines for you. So when it comes to planting peaches and plums, you can either usually go with a bare root variety or a potted plant variety. If you're going with bare root, planting in early spring while they are dormant is ideal or is really kind of necessary. So there's a specific window of time when you'll want to be doing that. And that is when the ground is workable, but it's still cold outside. So basically after the ground is thawed, but it's not necessarily warm and everything's growing yet. So really kind of right now almost. Granted, we're still in February and we might get another cold snap. So I'd say late February, early March is the time to be getting those in the ground. When you're planting those, there's a little bit of a graphic there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Essentially, what you want to do is you just want to dig a hole that is 3 times the size of sort of the intended width of those roots. You may get some of those bare roots in there. You're, very bare bones. You've got nothing there to be planting, but just sort of tapered out to the sides and make sure that you can have room for those roots to be spreading outward and keep an eye on where that top taper root is at, because that's where your planting line should be flush with the ground. Now, when it comes to potted plants, these are the ones that are ideally planted April to May. And it says ideally because they can technically be planted, any time of year, but really this is the ideal window for planting them. And that is after after the threat of frost has passed. When you do plant your trees, or if you're planting multiple trees, try to space them 12 feet, 20 feet apart, just depending on what the ultimate size of the tree is ultimately going to be. Keep in mind that you're going to have to get into these trees to prune them, to harvest them, to mulch around them, to clean up around them, and to mow if you're planting them in a lawn space. So you want to leave room for all of that maintenance. Also, you really don't want your trees growing into each other, and you do want some room for airflow because the less airflow you have, the more likelihood you're going to get disease in there because the more or the less airflow there is, the more humidity, the more moisture is in there, and the more disease is going to be encouraged. Also, you can source these trees either through local nurseries or online, but really, if you're going for very specific varieties, you should try looking for them in very early winter. That's the time of year where you're going to get the best selection of what is available. And you can always put your name on a list and say, I want this come springtime, and a lot of nurseries will hold them for you or have them available for you when it is time for them to ship. So when it comes to the soil conditions for planting these kinds of fruits, you want to try to incorporate your compost or your organic matter into these areas before they go into the ground, because it's not a situation where you're going to be able to amend the soil afterwards. So adding that organic matter first is really your first and only time to be able to do some heavy amending of the soil. The ideal soil conditions that you're going to want to be looking for is a pH of 6.0 to 7.0. The phosphorus is in that 75 to 100 range, and your potassium at around 250 to 300. And all of that can be told to you through a soil test. If you are an avid fruit or vegetable gardener, right now is a great time to be doing a soil test and getting that information back so that you can make your amendments before planting. Uh, Also, if you are really avid about planting these trees and you don't want any competition against them whatsoever, or if you know that the area you're going to be planting in has some issues, consider preparing or tarping the area the fall before. If you are tarping it, essentially what's going to happen is going to kill the stuff that's underneath through a long-term solarization. But when it kills what's underneath, it's not only killing weeds or pests or disease, it's also killing your soil microbiome. So that's another reason that it's really important to come back in with that compost afterward, because you're reintroducing those microorganisms to your soil that will then help for all of that healthy root growth and nutrient absorption. When it comes to watering, your young trees will require 1 inch to 2 inches of water per week, either through rain or irrigation. So you just need to be keeping an eye on how much precipitation you're getting so you can supplement it with other water at home. That said, if it is hot and dry weather, 5 gallons of water per week is typical. Occasional slow and deep watering will also encourage that deep root growth. So what that means is putting your hose on a trickle and kind of just leaving it around the root base and letting that really trickle deep into the ground so that those roots can then reach deep for that water. Also, before you plant, there's a quick soil test that you can do in relation to water, which is essentially just filling up the hole with water and watching how long it takes for that water to drain. Obviously, you don't want your hole to be sitting in your tree to be sitting in a hole that is just going to be basically a water bowl, because that will rot your roots. So, watching this, you can make your soil amendments. You can feather the hole itself outward a little bit more, and essentially break that soil barrier there that may be generated to help with your drainage. You also want to hold off on initial pruning. It can be a tendency of people once they get this brand new tree in their yard, they want to make it look pristine, right? But really, that very first year, you have to remember that you're cutting up those roots and you're really stressing this plant out when you're putting it into the ground and adding these pruning cuts to it. You're adding more stressors to the plant, and built stressors are what kill plants eventually. So, only remove your damaged or dead or rubbing branches that first year. Otherwise, just leave it alone. Also, keep in mind that leaf buds generates your root stimulator hormone. So, the more leaf buds you are cutting off, the less roots you are having that are growing underground. Also, left in general, it's just going to equate to better survival for your plant. So, when it comes to spring pruning, for your existing trees. So now we're not talking about brand new trees, but we're talking about trees that have been around for a while. Um, you want to be pruning before spring growth begins whatsoever. So that really is about right now. Um, this is after the coldest weather has passed. And keep in mind that you don't want to be removing more than 20% of the living growth from the plant. So this doesn't include any dead wood. Dead wood can be removed from your tree at any point in time. But removing more than 20% of that growth, it is again that accumulating stressor factor. You don't want too many of those stressors at once on your plant. So, when you are looking for things to be pruning out of your trees, look for diseased and infected branches, rubbing branches, weakly attached branches, dual leaders. So, if you have a tree that is growing in a Y like this, um, that essentially is going to mean that eventually, if you ever have like an ice storm come through or a windstorm, the weight on that tree trunk is going to be pulled in two directions, and then you're going to have a stress point right in the middle where it might split. So removing one of those leaders or cutting one of those leaders in half, you're putting the central weight on a central focus instead of having all that weight right in the middle of that Y. Also, suckers and water sprouts, those tend to grow on a lot of our fruit trees. Just keep in mind that they do contribute to that 20%, especially with like an apple tree or something along those lines. If you were to remove all of the suckers on it, you wouldn't have much of an apple tree left. So definitely watch that 20% removal rule. But also remember that it's weakly attached wood, so it's really not something that should be kept in the long term. So you may be asking, doesn't that remove the fruit if you're supposed to be pruning in the early spring and it's about to be, flowering later on and then producing your fruit? Yes, it does, but that's actually kind of on purpose. So your spring pruning removes weight, it allocates resources, and it encourages new growth. So remember that all of that fruit that's being produced, it's adding more and more weight to your tree. Eventually, it could produce so much fruit, and it probably will produce so much fruit without um, any sort of mitigation measures that it's going to harm the tree because it can't sustain all that weight. And that's when you get broken branches and you get broken um, trunks on your tree. Also, as you remove some of that fruit, it's going to take those resources that would have gone to those branches and allocate them instead to the fruit that has been kept. So you're going to get better fruit production that is healthier and larger. It also encourages new growth. So all of those little tiny pruning cuts are actually going to instigate the growth that you need for new branches to be sort of fleshing out through your plant. With peaches specifically, there is some specific pruning factors that you need to keep in mind. So the way peaches actually fruit is they only produce on new growth. So that means the new growth that you have this year is the fruit that is going to be next year. If you were to skip a year of pruning, what's eventually going to happen is that growth is going to go outward and outward and outward, and that weight is going to go outward and outward and outward. So it's actually very common with your peaches to see them split right down the middle, as in the tree itself split right down the middle, because that weight has gone so far away from that central trunk. So that's why it's really important to every spring get in there and actually try to prune or your peaches inward a bit without removing all of the new wood, because remember, the new wood is where your fruit develops. Also, thinning fruits in general is going to help with your stone fruits. Just remember they weigh a lot, and sometimes you'll get giant clusters right next to each other. So again, this comes back to your nutrient allocation. The way that peaches specifically grow on a plant, they don't grow in clusters like, say, an apple would, but what they do grow is they kind of just grow along the stem at nodes. So you'll want to just kind of pay attention to where they're growing and try to space them out a bit. You always try to look for the healthiest sort of fruits that are developing and try to take the ones that might be damaged out. And just remember the ultimate size of the fruit. If you're looking for a fruit that's going to be, 3 inches wide, you may want to try to leave up to 6 inches between the fruits that are developing, depending on the variety you have and how ultimately large the fruit is supposed to be. And that does apply to plums as well, but just remember that it's much more prominent with peaches. Plums can need thinning, but it's really not as necessary. So when it comes to harvesting, as I mentioned, peaches are harvested in your July through September window, and plums are just a little bit later in August through September. Flavor and softness are going to be your best ripeness indicators with this. So it's really kind of just a matter of feeling it and making sure that it's got a little bit of softness before. pulling them. You will see a bit of a color change with them as well. But really, the best way to go about just figuring out if they're fully ripe and ready to go is by tasting them. Generally, they're going to be bitter or very tart otherwise, and they may not actually be very soft, or they'll be kind of crunchy if they're not ready. Also, a good indicator is that they will gently twist off of the stems. Ripe ones will separate very easily, and ones that are not ripe yet are going to take a little bit of effort to be able to pull off of the plant. You do want to be sure when you are harvesting to try to do that gentle twist offward because it can be very easy to rip the fruits because they are softer fruits. So especially like right along that stem area, you'll get rips sometimes. You want to be sure to try to twist that stem off. And also just handle them gently in general because they can bruise very easily. Some common issues that you may see with both of these fruits. Black knot is one that will pop up on plums, and you see that on the top left over there. Peach leaf curl is obviously very common with your peaches. Brown rot is a fungal disease that you can get on the fruits. Plum curculio is a fly that leaves a larva inside of the fruits and will hollow it out and leave droppings inside, basically making it inedible. Oriental fruit moth and then green June beetle are other big issues. And then cherry leaf spot is mentioned in here. Typically, that's a cherry disease, but it does spread to some other stone fruits, including your plums. And so what's the control with all of these? Well, it kind of depends. So the thing with your control of any kind of disease or pest issue on your stone fruits is that you're going to have to be looking at the stage of growth that it is in every year for certain controls. So they have a dormant stage that we are in right now. There's the pink just before bud open stages. So you'll see a picture there on the second photo there on the right. It's just before the buds themselves turn into flowers. That's a stage. And then there's also the stage right after all the petals fall. You'll notice there is no stage as it is in flower, and that's because we're not treating things while it's in flower. That is when the pollinators are out, actively looking for those flowers, so we don't want any chemicals on there that could harm them. And then there's also the shuck split phase, which is right after the essential shucks of the ovaries or the fruits have started to fall off, and the fruit itself is starting to develop. So with each of those stages, your dormant bud stage, that's when you'd be treating for peach leaf curl or black knot. So right now, that is when those two diseases are being treated. Just before the buds open, that's brown rot. After petal drop, that'd be brown rot, cherry leaf spot, and plum curculio. Shuck splits that you're looking at brown rot, your cherry leaf spot, curculio, and then oriental fruit moth. And then with after your shuck split to just harvest in general all of those except for your cherry leaf spots, and then adding in your green Jimbudu. So feel free to take a quick, screenshot of that, or this recording will be available afterwards because I know that's a lot of information at once. But that said, we do have two different publications out there for you, specifically with this information, and then with the specific pesticides that you would have to use, or that you could not have to use, but that you could use with these various pest issues. So if you go to the KSRE bookstore, which is just bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu, as seen at the bottom of the screen here, and you can type in the MF3430 for the spray guide and the different diseases and times they are treated, and then MF3431 here on the right for those different types of pesticide treatments. Now you may be saying, well, what if I don't want to use pesticides, which is completely reasonable and a situation where you're going to be eating this food. But that said, it's a little bit trickier with your fruits in general. They do kind of need pesticides a lot of times in order to be completely pest free. But there are some tactics that people can use otherwise. That said, if you're looking at plum curculio as an issue, kaolin clay can be a solution, and the same thing for your Oriental fruit moth. What kaolin clay essentially is, it's literally a clay that you then put into a sprayer and you mix with water and you spray a layer of that sort of muddy solution onto your trees. And it makes it so that the moths of those pests do not like to land onto that area to either feed or to nest. That said, it will wash off because it is clay every single time that it rains. So it is something that does have to be continually reapplied. It's also something that will very easily clog your sprayer components. So there are some messy side notes with that. Also, Bacillus thuringiensis is a bacteria that is an organic pesticide control in a lot of organic pesticides they may see out there. And essentially, that one is it exists to control caterpillars and worms. So you can use that with your Oriental fruit moth. Don't underestimate fall cleanup in general. So this might be one of your bigger factors when it comes to sort of natural controls of pests. Remember that all of that fallen fruit and leaves and twigs can harbor pests' eggs. It can harbor the pests themselves that they're feeding on over winter. Um, it can keep spores and diseases in your soil and right next to your tree that can then reinfect your tree later on. So really, every fall going through after everything is done and just raking up that area and getting all of that plant debris out of there can do so much for your plant. That, in addition to spacing your plants out correctly and pruning them correctly to instigate that airflow, can do a lot. That said, you're still probably going to see things like Oriental fruit moth or plum curculio. So it's kind of an integrated management approach where you might want to, it's not going to be one clean solution. You might want to use several solutions in collaboration with each other. And then also remember that with any kind of these trees, you're going to want to be incorporating your winter animal protections. So tree wraps and tree covers will help with that, or trunk covers will help with that. And then I always like to throw something fun into here before handing it off to Chelsea. So, peaches are actually called botanically as through their Latin name, Prunus persica, and that is because Latin botanists actually thought that they originated in Persia or what is modern day Iran, but that is not the case. They actually originated in China, and over centuries they traveled to Iran through the Silk Road. So that is actually how they came to be in that area. So, with that, I will welcome questions and we will shortly hand it off to Chelsea. Okay, well, if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat and we will answer them at the end of our session here.
My name is Chelsea King, and I'm the Nutrition, Food Safety, and Health Agent here at the Extension office. And I'm going to talk about the nutrition, some food safety when we're talking about preserving our own food, and then some recipes at the end. So to get started, we know that peaches are sweet and very, very aromatic, especially when they're ripe. If you've ever smelled an unripe peach, they just don't really have a strong scent. But when that peach is very ripe, it is a very strong aromatic smell. There are hundreds of varieties, and Anthony went through some of them, but really from the most kind of common way that you'll see them is you'll see them sold as yellow or white, whether that's at a farmer's market or at a grocery store. So when it comes to that, you may have specific varieties, but from a perspective of just the two types of peaches that most people know, there's the yellow peaches and the white peaches. There are some flavor affinities, so peaches go well with a lot of other different fruits, different seasonings and spices, and of course, some of the very neutral cheeses and like mascarpone and figs and things like that. And of course, yogurt. So the white peaches were primarily grown in Asia, but they are becoming more common in the US. The skin is a light reddish and the flesh is more of that pale white or a very pale yellow. The white peaches are less sweet, and this is because they are more sweet because they are less acidic. So they are going to be on the sweeter side. Peaches tend to be a little bit more acidic, but peaches still, when they're ripe, are sweet. The white peaches also have a more delicate flesh. So the white peaches are not ideal for baking. They typically are consumed fresh or in different dishes. The yellow, they are easier to find, although white is becoming more common. The yellow is still more easier to find, And we know that that yellow peach is that very warm yellow color on the inside and has a more yellow orange tint on the outside compared to the white peaches. The flavor is a bit more acidic, as I mentioned, but the great thing about the yellow peaches is because they aren't quite as sweet as the white, they do pair really well with sweet or savory dishes. So they're kind of a multi-purpose fruit when we think about how we can prepare them and what we can do with them. And they do have that firmer flesh than the white, so they are then more better suited for baking, where they're going to be a little bit more heat tolerant because they're not quite as delicate. We know that peaches are a great nutrition resource when we think about our diets and what we're consuming. One medium has about 75 calories and about 16 grams of carbohydrates. The peaches are not a high protein or really a high fiber food when we compare them to some of our other fruits, but they do have some great nutrients as well and a lot of vitamins and minerals that contribute to our daily nutrition needs. For example, copper is pretty high at 14% in our peaches, and then vitamin C gives us about 7% of our daily value. So there are some health benefits for peaches. Peaches have been shown to potentially reduce risk of inflammation. This is because of that vitamin C content and the antioxidants. We know that consuming peaches may also support healthy blood sugars. So they are a lower glycemic food than some of our other fruit. So when we think about how quick, so when we consume something, how quickly our blood sugar rises, that's what we indicate as that glycemic load. And so how quick it rises is going to be a little bit less in our peaches compared to maybe some other fruits. We also know that it could support your health of your immune system and it may improve our eye health. This is because of that yellow orange color. So we know that peaches are loaded with carotenoids or vitamin A. And so therefore that's a good source for immune health, but also our eye health. And then they also may help regulate our blood pressure. Again, the antioxidants and the components that are commonly found in our peaches help to regulate and reduce our blood pressure. Again, these are all potential benefits. There's a lot of factors that do go into it, but consuming peaches are a good choice when we think about the types of foods that we're incorporating into our diet. Culinary uses, the peach blossoms are edible in small amounts. You're not going to be wanting to eat your whole blossoms in your tree, but they are edible in small amounts, so they go good in salads or in cold drinks or teas as more of the decorative components. Now, if you are using pesticides to treat your bugs that are invading your trees, you wouldn't want to potentially use your peach blossoms, but they can be edible. Peaches are sweet and a little bit sturdy, so they are best consumed baked, broiled. Grilled peaches are a fantastic summer treat. They provide that kind of nice, sweet, and savory. Poached peaches are also a good option. And of course, just a peach raw. You can't beat that. Roasted, sauteed, lots of different variations. And the pictures in the right do kind of highlight what I mentioned before, that they go really well in our sweet dishes like a peach dessert, or they go well in a savory dish like a salad. Peaches do continue to ripen after they are picked, so you do want to make sure that when you are picking your peaches, that you are checking for that ripeness. And if they are not quite ripe, you can leave them sit out on the counter. So we want to store those ripe peaches in the refrigerator. That is one of the fruits that we do not want to leave out on our counter because it does ripen. And so kind of putting it in the refrigerator helps to slow down that ripening process a little bit. But if you do have some unripe peaches to ripen them, you just want to put them in a brown paper bag and kind of loosely close it and allow them to sit at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. They will release ethylene gas, which helps to ripen them. You can also put an avocado or a banana in with them, which will speed up that ripening process. And then once they're ripe, if you're not going to eat them or use them immediately, go ahead and store them in that refrigerator. Peaches are susceptible to oxidation, which is the browning once they are cut. So just like an apple becomes brown after it's been sitting and exposed to air, peaches can do the same. So if you aren't going to use them immediately or you're going to store them in something, you'll want to go ahead and soak them in a ascorbic acid solution. Or you can also put a little bit of lemon juice on, and that will kind of provide a little barrier to prevent oxygen from getting to that cell wall. When you're selecting and purchasing, when you press a peach, you are going to have kind of a slight give on down on the flesh, which indicates that it is ripe. So whether you're getting from the farmer's market, growing your own, and to indicate, Anthony had talked about that it'll pull off easy from the tree branch, but also it will have a slight give when you press your thumb on the flesh. And I mentioned that the ripe peaches will also have a sweeter smell than ones that are not quite ripe. Again, if you had a poor harvest, if there was an early frost and your peach trees didn't produce, store-bought canned or frozen peaches can be a nutritious alternative to those fresh ones. They do have fewer antioxidants than our fresh ones, so that is one thing that they're not going to quite have all those powerful nutrients, but they do still have a lot of those other good vitamins and minerals. We do just want to make sure that we are purchasing peaches canned in water or 100% juice to reduce our added sugar consumption, and same with those frozen peaches if you purchase them. So preserving peaches preserve really well. The one caveat is that we do not can white flesh peaches. Those are a freeze only peach. Again, this is because they do have a lower acidity than our yellow peaches, and there just isn't enough research out there. There's not kind of an official tested recipe that shows that canning the white peaches at a certain point, temperature, time, all those different things, added sugar or acids, that they can be preserved long-term safely canning. So if you do grow white peaches or if you get them from a market or store, freeze them as your preservation method. However, all your yellow peaches, you can certainly water bath or pressure can. The best method is to hot pack. And so, what a hot pack is basically that you are heating the fruit in that liquid and that you're pouring then the fruit and liquid together. So that just basically helps to prevent shrinkage. And so you're already kind of heating the fruit and liquid a little bit and drawing out some of those waters. So it's going to prevent some kind of shrinkage when you do the processing. You do need about 9 pounds, 11 pounds of peaches for 9 pints. You want to dip the fruit in the boiling water. You do not want to preserve peaches with their skin on. The texture will change and it could potentially impact your final quality. So you do want to make sure that the skins and then obviously the pit is being removed. And then you're going to either preserve it in a syrup, water, or even a juice. So oftentimes people will just preserve it in water, but you can also do a syrup or a 100% juice as another option. You want to make sure that you're leaving that headspace to prevent anything from boiling out, as well as just making sure that the seal goes well. And the best method for this is to go ahead and kind of just cut them in layers, and then you're going to kind of stack them on top of each other one by one to make them fit nice and tight in that jar. The tighter you can get that jar filled, the better, and the less like floating that you'll have. So if you do notice that your peaches float after canning, it's probably just that that jar wasn't packed super tight. You do want to then process based on the method and your altitude. One thing is with peaches, you do water, even though you can pressure can, water bath is really the best when we think about the quality. The temperature is a little bit less, and obviously the time tends to play a factor as well. But if pressure canned peaches can often become a little bit more mushy and the texture just isn't quite as great as the water bath because the water bath has that lower temperature that you're processing it. You can also dehydrate the peaches. Again, same thing. You'll want to make sure that the skins are removed. They tend to not set up too well in the dehydrating process. To prevent that browning, you're going to use an ascorbic acid solution or a vinegar solution or a lemon juice solution. You're going to dry them at 140 degrees, and you just want to dry them until they're pliable and leather. So you don't want to dry them to the point where they're still tacky, or you don't want to dry them to the point where they crack. So that pliable, they're going to have a little bit of move and they're going to kind of have a leathery texture, but they're not going to be sticky or tacky. Dried peaches can be stored then for quite some time. They can be used in different dishes and recipes. With any dried fruit, if you are storing it long term, adding an oxygen absorber pack into your container that you're storing them will help to keep that oxygen and any moisture out, therefore extending how long those dried peaches may last on your shelf. And then freezing is another great option. Again, skinning and removing the pits. If you plan to just throw it in a smoothie, keeping the skins on certainly won't hurt, but the recommendation is to remove the skins. You can freeze it in a couple different ways. You can freeze it in a syrup pack. You can freeze in a sugar pack, just basically you're adding sugar to that mixture. You can store, freeze as crushed or pureed, and then you just kind of pop them out and add them to different things. And then the one thing that isn't on here is, of course, you can just store them as sliced peaches that you'll add to smoothies or chopped up and add to your fruit or yogurt, or excuse me, fruit to your yogurt. So whatever. When you are doing the sliced peaches, just putting them on a cookie sheet and freezing them as individuals before you put them in a Ziploc bag will obviously help prevent them from joining and becoming one big block in a Ziploc bag. So here's a couple recipes. This is a common popular one that we've used for lots of our classes here when we've taught pies or different summer treats. Peach hand pies using fresh peaches. Of course, if you don't have fresh peaches, using frozen thawed peaches are a perfectly suitable substitution. This one, you could certainly make your own pie crust. We do have a pie baking class that we always do in November that will teach you how to make a homemade pie crust if you've never made one before. Or you can certainly use a refrigerated pie crust, whatever works for you. And then you're just going to kind of do all of your peaches in a sugar flour solution, and then you're just going to fill your hand pies. These can be baked in the oven, or these actually work out really good in the air fryer as well, air frying for about 12 minutes. So if you don't want to heat up your whole house, you can certainly use your air fryer and make these as well. And then, a traditional kind of peach salad. So peach and tomatoes go really well together. And this one also has a soft goat cheese, but any type of soft cheese, whether it's mozzarella or another soft cheese, would certainly work. So it has ripe peaches, ripe tomatoes, baby arugula. You could certainly use baby spinach or baby kale. You could use regular spinach or regular kale. You just kind of want to chop it up into more bite-sized pieces. That's the benefit of already having the baby arugula or baby spinach, is it's in a nice, lovely bite-sized piece. And then this also has bacon. You could certainly omit the bacon if you preferred. The dressing is actually a spicy brown mustard with vinegar and olive oil and a little bit of honey or nectar to kind of cut that acidity of the vinegar and the acidity of our tomatoes. So you just kind of mix your dressing together until it's emulsified and then toss it. The one thing with anytime you're making salads, if you're not going to serve it immediately, go ahead and leave the dressing off and don't add the dressing until you're going to serve it. The dressing will make that arugula, spinach, or kale kind of wilt and not be just as good. So you can certainly make this in advance and then just serve it with the dressing right as you're ready to consume. And then moving on to plums. So plums and prunes are one and the same. Well, kind of. So not every plum can be a prune, but every prune is a dried plum. So there's a certain variety that is used to become a prune. So that is why not every plum can be a prune, but every prune is a version of a dried plum, a specific type of variety. Prunes are more nutrient dense. They contain more calories, about 5 times more. They contain more sugar, more fiber, more vitamins, minerals, and all that stuff. But that to be said, they do contain more calories, so they are more nutrient dense. And therefore, consuming them, especially if you're trying to reduce your amount of calories that you're consuming, you might want to choose the fresh over the dried version for our plums. So for a fresh plum, they're 50 calories, 8 grams of carbohydrate. Again, not a high protein or fiber source, but still same kind of nutrient profile as our peaches were. So the health benefits of plums, specifically in the prune form, may help relieve constipation due to fiber, but it also has a higher sorbitol, and sorbitol can help to relieve that constipation. So that's why prune juice is often a kind of natural solution to constipation, or consuming just the dried prunes themselves. Plums have a lot of antioxidants, so they may reduce inflammation, can reduce the heart disease and cancer risk due to anthocyanins. So it's those red kind of purple colors that we see common in our plums that is related to heart disease and cancer, can help prevent them. Can also help promote bone health due to just the vitamin and mineral composition that we typically found in our plums, and then also may help regulate our blood pressure, similar to what peaches do. So culinary uses, I would say less people use plums than peaches when we think about culinary uses. A lot of times they might just kind of consume the fresh plums as is. The taste is sweet with a slight astringent taste. So the skin is actually the more tart version. So if you don't like the taste of plums, maybe try peeling it because that is where the tartness is. And then that internal flesh is obviously the sweeter. So if you've had plums before, but you didn't think you were a fan, it could just be kind of that skin that is maybe making you not a fan. So maybe try peeling it and you might have a better outcome. Plums can be baked, broiled, raw, stewed, pureed, or juiced, and they do also tend to go well in the sweet and savory dishes, as you can see here in the photos on the right-hand side. So some options that for me when personally when I was doing this presentation, I was like, man, I don't really eat plums very often. They're a great thing, but it's just not something that I routinely consume. It's probably a fruit that I don't purchase often, and I certainly don't grow my own plums as of yet, but maybe after Anthony's presentation I will. But they can be really a great addition. Just chopping up plums and little dippers and using it as a yogurt dip or adding plums to your smoothies. They can get mixed in with couscous and apples and lemon juice and dried plums, tossed in a trail mix. So thinking about the prunes and adding prunes instead of raisins to trail mix as a great option to get a different fruit into our diet. Adding them fresh to salad as a kebab ingredient. Of course, there's something like a plum syrup over pancakes, yogurt, or ice cream, and then kind of like a plum chutney as a cracker or bread instead of a traditional, like maybe apple chutney. So baking with prunes, prune puree is kind of a multi-use baking substitute, and a lot of people might not know this or might not think about it, but you can actually use prune puree to replace sugar, eggs, and fat in certain recipes. Now, the thing with prunes is it is a more concentrated version. So, of course, it's still going to have sugar. So, that is one thing. If you're trying to reduce the fat, you might substitute it, but you might be increasing the sugar. So, here's just some examples with some options. So if you're going to try to swap for some sugar, you can use prune puree to replace about 1/3 to 1/2 of the sugar in a recipe. If you're going to use it as an egg substitute, you can kind of swap out one of the eggs for about 1/4 of a cup of prune puree. And then keeping in mind that if a recipe calls for more than 3 eggs, it's probably not going to give you a good end result. So if it only calls for 1 to 2 eggs, it might be a good substitute. So often cakes or muffins might only have 1 to 2 eggs, but if like angel food cake, obviously it would not work to have that. And then if you're going to reduce the fat, but reducing the fat doesn't necessarily mean that you're reducing the sugar. So just keeping that in mind, you can replace up to half of the butter or oil with an equal amount of prune puree. And those are just general guidelines. Now, depending on the specific recipe that you may be making, it could vary. And a prune puree is basically just prunes that have been soaked and then obviously pureed in a food processor to make it to a nice, smooth, creamy kind of texture. Plums, like peaches, continue to ripen after they are picked. And so you want to follow the same principles with the peaches. You want to store them in the refrigerator. And if they aren't quite ripe yet, when you have them and you want to ripen them quicker, you can certainly put them in a bag and let them ripen on the counter. And similar, they're susceptible to oxidation. So go ahead and give it a little ascorbic acid solution or sprinkle with some lemon juice to keep it that nice color and prevent any of that browning. And then, of course, you want to just store any cut fruit in a container, and then prunes should be stored in an airtight container in a dark, cool place. You can preserve plums by your home food preservation method. So you can water bath or pressure can. Again, similar concept with our peaches. The hot pack method is the best, and a water bath method is going to be the best compared to the pressure can. You need about 9 pounds of plums for 9 pints. You're going to go ahead and prick the skins of the plums with the fork to prevent splitting. And then you might need to go ahead and, if it has a stone in the middle, go ahead and take it and halved and pit. And then you're going to can it in the same. You're going to either use a syrup or you can can and preserve it in water. You do want to make sure that you cover and kind of let that fruit and the sauce or water that you're using boil and let stand for 20 minutes. And then you're just going to hot pack them and leave that headspace. Again, if you want to, these are just kind of simplified versions of the home food preservation, but the National Center for Home Food Preservation, this is where all of the recipes and methods come from. So certainly follow those to get the very specific details. This is some of that, and then the method and the altitude will also be listed on that website as well. You can dehydrate your plums, so wash and cut in half. You want to kind of flatten that fruit, and then you can go ahead and just kind of steam them. You want to blanch them for 1 to 2 minutes, which basically takes out some of that water already, and then it's going to speed up that drying process. So you'll dry a little bit lower than the peach temperature. You're going to dry about that 130 to 135. And again, you want it to be pliable, no pockets of moisture. You don't want it to be super tacky. And then lastly, you can certainly freeze them. Same concepts as your peaches. You can freeze them in the exact same methods as what you would peaches. And then a couple recipes. As I said, I personally don't cook a lot with plums, but after doing this one, this presentation, I'm certainly more motivated to cook with plums and especially prunes, right? People tend to think about just eating prunes as having one or two to help with constipation, but they actually can be incorporated in lots of recipes. So the California prunes, it's californiaprunes.org. If you do want to incorporate more prunes and plums into your diet, the californiaprunes.org had a ton of recipes. And so here, this recipe comes from that website, and it's basically like a soy sauce noodle mixture, but you're using prunes that you're going to chop or mash, and then it's using your soy sauce, a rice vinegar, chili crisp, and the soy sauce. And so basically, the prunes act as that sweetener for your soy sauce, while providing obviously lots of vitamins and minerals and fiber, all the good stuff for us. And then your noodles, you can certainly use any type of noodle you want, whether it's ramen, udon, rice, soba, any noodle works. And then you're just going to season it with scallion sesame seeds. Certainly, you can add some veggies to this dish as well, or making sure that you're having a side of veggies, because we want to make sure that we're having lots of those veggies. And this dish obviously doesn't have many, so adding some more on top of it or to the side is a great addition. And then this one, I did make this recipe. It's a sheet pan chicken and plum recipe. It has chicken thighs, or you can certainly use chicken breast. It has a whole grain mustard, and then you have just your fresh plums. You can actually buy canned plums as well. So if you want to make this, but you don't have access to fresh plums, canned plums also work. Has a red onion, and an interesting combination of allspice and garlic, and then some rosemary. So you're going to season your chicken, kind of let that marinate and sit for 30 minutes, and then you're going to go ahead and start cooking the chicken first. We don't want to add the plums and onions and things while the chicken is cooking from the very beginning, because the plums and onions are going to become overcooked and become mushy and not very palatable. So you want to cook the chicken first, kind of get that going, and then you're going to add your plums and the onions, and you're going to roast it for another 20 minutes or so until your plums are nice and tender and your chicken reaches 165 degrees Fahrenheit as that internal temp. So this is a great sheet pan dinner meal. We had a sheet pan cooking class in January, and so this recipe could have been a great addition that we would have had incorporated in that. But with that, here is my contact information. And if you would like to receive any new or updated information, we have a recipe of the month also that goes out in our In Good Health. So feel free to sign up for our monthly e-newsletter using that QR code or that direct kind of tiny URL link. And with that, are there any questions?
Chelsea, there was one question that was posed in the chat for me, which was, do you recommend treating for peach leaf curl even if a tree hasn't experienced it before? What I just told them was that if you have not seen it yet, then it is probably not something that needs to be treated unless you are seeing the issue on neighboring trees. Say your neighbor also has a peach or a plum tree, then you might want to go ahead and treat because it's close enough nearby. That said, those first years of infection with peach leaf curl specifically are more of an aesthetic issue. It's really after several years of infection where you start to see deep defoliation that might actually harm the tree itself. So, I recommended that if you have not seen it yet, more than likely you just need to be watching for signs that you should start treating in the future. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, we want to thank you all for joining us today. We will have another Dig Your Dinner next month, so be sure to watch out for that online on the events page of our upcoming sessions on the Johnson County website. And this session, we just had another question here in the chats. It will be around for you to use later. The recording will be on our YouTube channel, and we'll be sure to send it out to you as well in an email. So thank you again for joining us.